everybody, and welcome to New Consciousness Review. I'm Miriam Knight, and our guest today is Frank DeMarco. Frank was formerly a journalist and the co-founder and chief editor for 16 years of Hampton Roads, a highly respected publishing house responsible for such bestsellers as Neale Donald Walsch's Conversations with God series. Frank authored 5 books of his own that centered on his personal experience and attempt to help others understand the purpose and potential of their existence. He conducts workshops on communicating with guidance and writes a monthly column for The Meta Arts, an online magazine. His past and current thinking may be found on his blog, Eye of My Own Knowledge, on hologrambooks.com. Today we're going to talk about his new book, The Cosmic Internet, Explanations from the Other Side. Now, how intriguing is that? Welcome, Frank. Welcome to New Consciousness Review.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
We're delighted to have you. Frank, I had, considering what a skinny little book it was, it took me ages to get through it because I had to pause after every page or even after every paragraph and just let it sink in. There is so much in this book, and I have no idea how we're going to even scratch the surface in the course of this interview, but we're going to give it a try.
Well, clearly we'll have to go on for 5 hours. It took a lot of work to make that into a little skinny book. It would have been much easier to make a big fat book.
Yeah, I know. When I write a review, it's much easier to write a 3-page review than a 1-paragraph review.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, Frank, tell me, were you always a spiritual explorer?
I think by inclination I was, but I didn't really start on my own, which is, I think, what really counts, until about the late 80s. I was in Norfolk, Virginia, and I was working for the Virginian Pilot. I was an editorial writer there, and I went to the first Shirley MacLaine seminar for reasons that I explained in my first book, Muddy Tracks, because I basically had a miracle happen, and the miracle got my attention. So I thought, well, maybe I better go there and see. And as a result of that, I came away from that weekend, and I said, she delivered everything she promised, including you're getting a sense of your own higher self. So I wrote that up in the Sunday newspaper, and this is 1987. nobody gave favorable, not among the journalists anyway, gave favorable notice to anything metaphysical or spiritual. And as a result, that afternoon, the whole New Age community of Virginia Beach knew who I was because they had never seen that before. And as a result of that, Bob Friedman and I met a few months later, and a couple of years after that, I left the newspaper. He left his current job, and we founded Hampton Roads together.
Very interesting background. Yeah, I met Bob a few weeks ago. The two of you, actually, you told a very funny story about conversations with God.
On my tombstone, they're going to put, he turned down conversations with God.
Luckily, you had Bob there to pick up the pieces.
That's right. My secretary sent the wrong letter to Neale Walsch, and the letter we had 2 kind of form letters, and the one she sent was one for the wrong genre, and it basically said, this isn't the kind of thing we do. And Neale Walsch looked at it and goes, this is exactly the kind of thing you do. He must not have read it. So he sent it back again, and this time he got Bob, and Bob liked it a lot. When I read it, I was thinking, this is the same kind of stuff I do. Everybody knows this stuff, which is pretty stupid. but it didn't seem to me to be that different, And it was just, sometimes when you go along far enough on a path, you forget that not everybody else is going on that path because it seems so familiar.
It reminds me of Paul Ray, the sociologist, who coined the term cultural creatives about, 10 or 11 years ago. And he claimed that they comprised about 25% of the population, and it was the people who kind of were thinking about spiritual things, buying organic food, being more conscious about the environment. And one of the things that characterized them was that they all thought they were alone.
Yeah, sure. Well, you could see why, too. I mean, you must have felt the same way. Our
Absolutely.
Society, the way it's organized, tends to isolate you, although that's breaking down rapidly, I think.
Yeah, but what I am finding, and in fact it's being proven in the publishing industry, is that body, mind, spirit books are one of the few genres that are continuously growing in numbers of books published. I think there's just a tremendous hunger for this type of information. People are looking for something that they're not finding in present-day society.
That's right. When you can't pursue the wrong road forever without at some point getting the sneaking suspicion that maybe you're on the wrong road. And people have tried everything that was considered respectable. They've tried consumerism. They've tried ignoring other things and just going for pleasure. And it doesn't work because it's not what we're here for. So sooner or later, a certain number of people. But I talked, as you know, I call the ones I talked to on the other side, I could just call them the guys upstairs rather than trying to characterize them. And the guys upstairs have said more than once, humanity is sort of like, you could consider it's like a flock of like a sheep or maybe a herd of cattle. If you have a herd of cattle and you want to get them across a river or a stream, the first few are very hard because they don't want to leave the herd. And it gets a little easier. But once more than half of the herd, or once more than X% of the herd is across the river, then the ones behind hurry to catch up because they want to be with the herd. And what I think is going to happen is the ones who have been lagging, when they see enough of us, and I don't know what that X number is, when they see enough of us, it'll turn. And all of a sudden, that will be the thing to do. At that point, we will start to be the problem instead of the solution. But we'll worry about that then.
Now, let's talk about your book. Your book deals with no less than the meaning of life. That is a pretty tall order. Now, how is this book different from your other books?
Well, in a way, this book is a continuing culmination of the previous books. Muddy Tracks was just the one that talked about how I went into this in the first place and how I began to be. I wasn't really sure. I heard all the stuff. New Age people are always very fluent, and they'll tell you with great confidence, this is true, that is true, the other's true, but I didn't know that whether it was or not. So Muddy Tracks talked about my initial explorations, and then, especially when I was at the Monroe Institute, finding out, yes, these really are real abilities. You really can do it. Then, a few years later, Rita Warren, who was a PhD psychologist, she became a friend of mine, and she and I did 20-some sessions together in her house where she would ask questions. She had a whole bunch of questions backed up in her mind that she would like answers to. Is there life on the other side? What's it like? All of those kinds of big questions. I would go into an altered state, and the guys upstairs would come through. That became a huge, well, not a huge book, but it's an inch-thick book, The Sphere and the Hologram, and that is the transcripts of the first 22 sessions. This book, then, is a distillation of that plus stuff that has come, especially since 2005, when I took a 6-month sabbatical from Hampton Roads that I never returned from, but which was a very good career move, by the way. I recommend retirement highly. But this book, I tried in just a few chapters not to do transcripts because it's a lot for people to get, but as you saw, I gave it mostly in their words, but I juggled the stuff around and moved it around to be just a few core ideas. Because I feel, I feel funny talking to you about it because I know you already know this, but we'll talk for our readers' sake, for our listeners' sake. In our society, you've got the scientists who say there's nothing beyond. Many of them do. You have the fundamentalist religious types who say, no, you have to listen to what's in the Bible only. There's no personal guidance involved. And you have a lot of people who are just lost in the middle. And then you have artists and the creative people, maybe the cultural creatives you're talking about, who they want to know. They want to have their own personal experience. And I'm sort of in that realm myself. That's why I call my blog Eye of My Own Knowledge. That's not as arrogant as it sounds. Joan Grant, a long time ago, said that in ancient Egypt, that's how the priests used to teach. They weren't allowed to teach anything they hadn't already experienced. And that's what I tried to hold it to, you see. Well, if you have a society that doesn't know whether or not there's an afterlife, and if it does have opinions about the afterlife, doesn't have personal experience, it doesn't have any way for people to get the personal experience, or even a way for them to think about it so that they can consider getting the personal experience, then look around, and that's what we have. You have a society that basically is dying. That's my viewpoint of it.